They spilled scalding soup on my 14-month-old daughter. Then they smirked. That was their first mistake. Their second was assuming I was just another customer. Their third, and most critical mistake, was believing that when I walked out of their restaurant that night, they would never see me again. They were profoundly wrong. This isn't just a story about a lapse in service. It's a story about a line being crossed. And what happens when a father's protective instinct is channeled into a cold, strategic, and deeply personal solution. It's the story of how I bought the restaurant that humiliated my family, just for the satisfaction of looking the manager and his waiter in the eye and delivering their unceremonious dismissal. It was meant to be a celebration. My wife, Sarah, and I were marking our 5th wedding anniversary. We'd booked a table weeks in advance at the Gilded Spoon, a restaurant with a reputation for being upscale yet accommodating. Our daughter, Lily, just 14 months old, was with us. Taking a baby to a fine dining establishment is always a calculated risk, but we were determined to make it a special evening. The restaurant was as advertised. Low lighting, muted conversations, an air of quiet elegance. We were shown to a corner booth, a perfect spot to keep Lily contained and content. For the first 20 minutes, everything was flawless. We ordered a bottle of wine, reminiscing about the early days of our marriage, while Lily meticulously inspected the contents of a sugar packet. We were relaxed. We were happy. We ordered our appetizers and the French onion soup, a house specialty the waiter had recommended with a confident flourish. We had no idea the evening was about to take a turn. The restaurant began to fill up, and the initial calm of the staff gave way to a hurried, less attentive energy. Our waiter, a young man with an overly confident smile, rushed past our table more than once. We exchanged a look, a silent acknowledgement of the slipping service. But we were too focused on our own evening to give it much thought. Then it happened. The waiter approached carrying a tray with our soups. He pivoted toward the table with too much speed, and his movement was clumsy. The tray tilted. I saw the dark bowl begin to slide, tipping over the edge of the tray in what felt like slow motion, its scalding contents pouring directly onto my daughter in her high chair. The first sound was the splash. The second was a scream from my daughter that I will never forget. It was a cry of pure, sharp agony. Sarah was on her feet instantly, knocking her own chair over as she lunged for Lily, whose little legs were already turning a frightening shade of red where the hot soup had soaked through her dress. Panic set in. My hands were shaking as I tried to pull the hot, wet fabric away from her skin. The soup was thick with melted cheese, clinging to her. It was a parent's worst nightmare, realized in a matter of seconds. Through the fog of my own rising fear, I looked up, expecting to see staff rushing to help. I expected a manager to be sprinting toward our table. Instead, I saw the waiter. He stood a few feet away, his expression one of pure annoyance. And then, a smirk. He shot a glance at another staff member clearing a nearby table, gestured with his head toward our chaotic scene, and they shared a quiet, dismissive chuckle. It was so profoundly out of place, so lacking in basic human decency, that my mind struggled to process it. Laughter? They thought this was amusing? "Get a manager," I managed to say, my voice tight. "Get some cold water, now!" The waiter's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of condescension. "Relax," he said. "It's just soup. Kids cry." He made no move to help. Other staff members who saw what happened simply turned their backs, as if our crisis was a private matter, an inconvenience to be ignored. The manager finally appeared, drawn by the commotion. His expression wasn't one of concern, but of irritation. He didn't look at Lily. He didn't ask if she was okay. He looked at the mess on the floor. "Well," he sighed, hands on his hips, "this is a complication. My daughter is burned, Sarah yelled, her voice cracking. "Your waiter did this, and you're worried about the floor." The manager's eyes flickered to Lily for a second, then back to us. "Accidents happen," he stated flatly. "I'm sure she's fine. Now, I have to ask you to please keep her quiet. You're disturbing our other guests." I've never felt an anger so cold and so clear. To be met not with incompetence, but with a carefully crafted expression of corporate indifference in a moment like that was worse than the act itself. This wasn't an accident anymore. It was a statement. We were not valued. My daughter's pain was an operational problem to be managed. I scooped Lily into my arms and we left. We didn't pay. We walked straight out the door and drove to the nearest emergency room. The doctors and nurses were incredible, treating her second-degree burns with a level of compassion that stood in stark contrast to the restaurant staff. Their professionalism underscored the profound failure we had just experienced. The drive home from the hospital was silent. Lily, given a mild pain reliever, had finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. Sarah stared out the window, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. The image of the smirking waiter and the indifferent manager was burned into my mind. They had acted with impunity because they believed there would be no consequences. At night, I sat in the dark of our living room, replaying the events. Suing them was the obvious path. A lawsuit would cover the medical bills and compensate us for the distress. But what would that truly change? The restaurant's insurance would pay a claim, the waiter might receive a slap on the wrist, and the manager would continue his reign of dismissive service. The toxic culture would remain. Another family could easily suffer a similar fate. No, that wasn't an acceptable outcome. It wasn't about the money. It was about accountability. That's when the idea formed. It felt audacious, almost theatrical. Buy the restaurant. I run a successful logistics company. I knew nothing about the restaurant business. It was, on its face, an illogical and impractical response. But the more I considered it, the more it became the only option that made sense. It was the only way to ensure that people responsible faced a direct consequence. It was the only way to reclaim the power they had so arrogantly wielded over us. This was no longer about simple revenge. It was about surgically removing a cancer. By the time the sun came up, my decision had been made. I wasn't going to sue them. I was going to acquire them. The following Monday morning, I was on the phone with my lawyer before his office had officially opened. I laid out the situation. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Okay, let's look into it." That was all the validation I needed. We began our due diligence immediately. What my lawyer uncovered was not entirely surprising. The Gilded Spoon was a business in decline. A deep dive into public records and online reviews revealed a clear pattern of arrogant service and overpriced food, with the manager frequently mentioned by name for his rudeness. Financially, they were over-leveraged. The owners, a small investment group, had been quietly trying to find a buyer for months without success. The irony was almost too perfect. I instructed my lawyer to make an all-cash offer. It was below their initial asking price, but high enough to be seen as a serious lifeline. I wanted the transaction to happen with remarkable speed. My primary condition was that there would be no complex negotiations. I didn't want to give them time to think. I wanted them to see the offer as a clean escape from a failing asset. The owners were desperate. They saw a quick payout, an end to a persistent financial headache. They had no knowledge of my motivation. To them, I was an anonymous investor making a sound business decision. They agreed to my terms. The next few weeks were a blur of legal and financial maneuvers. I liquidated a portion of my portfolio to free up the capital. Sarah, seeing the resolve in my eyes, trusted my judgment. She knew this was a calculated move to restore a sense of justice for our family. Then, one Friday afternoon, the call came. "It's done," my lawyer said. "Congratulations, you're now the owner of a restaurant." A cold, quiet satisfaction washed over me. Phase 1 was complete. I waited until the following Monday. I put on my best suit. I drove to the restaurant and walked in just before the weekly staff meeting. The hostess looked up, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, followed by confusion. I walked past her, directly into the main dining area. The manager was at the front of the room, talking about weekend sales figures. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me, his brow furrowing. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone sharp. "This is a staff-only meeting." Standing near him, leaning against the table with that familiar, arrogant smirk, was the waiter. He nudged the manager, clearly signaling that the problem customer from a few weeks ago had returned. He seemed to be anticipating a confrontation. I walked calmly to the front of the room. The entire staff was now staring. I let the silence hang in the air for a beat. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Michael, and as of last Friday, I am the new owner of this restaurant." The energy in the room shifted instantly. Jaws dropped. I looked directly at the manager. The color drained from his face. His mouth hung open. I then turned my gaze to the waiter. His smirk had evaporated, replaced by a mask of dawning horror. The sight was deeply satisfying. "I was a guest here a few weeks ago," I continued, my voice even, "with my wife and my baby daughter. Some of you may recall the incident. One of your waiters," I gestured toward him, "spilt a bowl of scalding soup on my child." A murmur went through the staff. "An accident is one thing," I said, my voice dropping slightly. "Human error can be forgiven. What cannot be forgiven is a culture of indifference and cruelty. What cannot be forgiven is a staff that finds a child's pain a source of amusement. And a manager," I turned to the man beside me, who now looked physically ill, who was more concerned with the state of his floor than the burn on a baby's leg. I paused. "This establishment is no longer the Gilded Spoon. Effective immediately, we are closing for a complete overhaul. Under my ownership, this will be a place built on a foundation of respect and compassion. That change begins now." I looked at the manager. "You are fired. Collect your things. Your final paycheck will be mailed." Then I turned to the waiter. "You are also fired. I want you gone in the next 2 minutes." I addressed the remaining staff. "This restaurant will reopen in 2 weeks. We will be retraining in service standards and basic human decency. Anyone who does not wish to be part of that new culture is free to leave now. For those who stay, the standard has changed. The next time a guest is in distress, you will not stand by. You will help. Is that understood?" There were a few stunned nods. The manager and the waiter, realizing I was serious, turned and practically fled toward the back office. Their unceremonious dismissal was complete. We reopened 2 weeks later. The sign out front now reads, "Lily's Place." We have a new manager and a new team. A mix of the old staff who were willing to adapt and new hires who understand our values. Our policy is simple. The guest comes first. Always. Buying the restaurant was the single most extreme decision of my life. But every time I walk through those doors and see families enjoying a meal in a place that feels safe and welcoming, I know it was the right one. It was never about revenge. It was about accountability. I didn't just buy a restaurant. I bought justice. And that's what happens when you decide a problem needs a permanent solution.